Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Dandavat pranams. Please
Dandavat,
accept our
Mataji.
humble obeisances. We welcome all the participants and Her Grace Aruddha Mataji. Jai. Is a disciple of His Holiness Gopal Krishna Goswami Maharaj. She and her husband Anant Roop Prabhu began in Chicago in the early 1980s. Together, they started the ISKCON Temple in Boise in 1986 as a small weekly program in their home. Now there is a beautiful mid-sized Vedic temple for their lordship, Shri Shri Radha Banke Bihari Ji. She homeschooled their children and ran the Govinda's restaurant in Boise for 6 years. Currently, Aruddha Mataji travels to temples around the world to deliver seminars on Krishna conscious parenting and homeschooling. She is the author of the Homeschooling Bible for ISKCON, Homeschooling Krishna's Children. Her monumental work, Srimad Bhagvatam, a comprehensive guide for young readers, is currently in production. Having released Cantos 1, 2, and 3, she is about to release Canto 4 of this Bhagavatam curriculum for Gurukuls, homeschools, Sunday schools, and the rest. I would like to request Mataji to enlighten us on the topic studying Srimad Bhagavatam with children.
Hare Krishna, everyone. So nice to be here with all of you. So today I will present a seminar on studying Srimad Bhagavatam with children. Now, this seminar will be divided into three parts. First, we're going to talk about the spiritual benefits of studying Srimad Bhagavatam, and then the academic benefits, and the last one will be on the methodology. How do we actually study Bhagavatam with our children of different age groups? So let's begin this seminar. I want to start out by talking a little bit about uh, Prabhupada's vision for our children. Prabhupada, as you know, stressed three things, and that is book distribution, deity worship, and Gurukula. Now, Gurukula was very dear. Starting schools was very dear to Srila Prabhupada. Why? Because he wanted children who were not only good in their scholastic achievements, but also developed good character. And for that, he emphasized the studying of his books. He wanted his books to be studied not only just by adults, but also by children. And specifically, he wanted children to study Srimad Bhagavatam. Prabhupada wanted that from the very beginning, children should study English and Sanskrit so that they can read his books. Then he said they will be MA, PhD. Prabhupada wanted children, desired that they study Srimad Bhagavatam, which would equip a child to know every subject matter in the world. Then they would need nothing else. So now I'm going to read you a couple of quotes by Srila Prabhupada. And this is just a few among many, many quotes from Prabhupada concerning the importance of studying Srimad Bhagavatam. So please listen carefully. Our students specifically, they should take care of reading Srimad Bhagavatam. We have therefore prescribed in our school, Dallas, and from the very beginning, if they begin education with Bhagavad Gita and then come to Srimad Bhagavatam and read the whole literature, then they will be more than MA, PhD. Even astronomy, astrology, politics, sociology, atomic theory, everything is there. Therefore, if you study Srimad Bhagavatam very carefully, then you will get all knowledge completely. Throughout the whole world, whatever knowledge is there is in the Srimad Bhagavatam. If one simply reads this Srimad Bhagavatam, his education is the topmost. If one studies Srimad Bhagavatam, he is well versed in every subject matter. Prabhupada said that by giving the children this foundation, children become confident of their spiritual identity and also do well academically. Prabhupada's books inspire us to use logic and critical thinking, which are the main elements of academic education. Even a basic understanding of Bhagavatam philosophy far exceeds the level of thinking found in most college courses. He said Srimad Bhagavatam covers all subject matters. The children They get a head start on all other subjects. Later, when they have to study all these subjects through non devotional books, they will have the proper Vedic perspective and not be misled into atheistic or materialistic thinking. Why Srimad Bhagavatam? Because it's easier for children to study Srimad Bhagavatam because it has all the philosophy of Bhagavad Gita, but in the form of stories. So there is no harm or loss in studying Srimad Bhagavatam. Even a 6-year old can read directly from Srila Prabhupada's books. And because of the book's potency, the child's language skills quickly increase. Then they can master any other subject. What was amazing in my own life was that after just by reading 2 to 3 hours of Srimad Bhagavatam every day, my children's language skills were very, very good. And they could enter college even at an early age, study all subjects, and score high in every one of them. And their understanding of finer points was amazing. The teachers said that their understanding and maturity was better than their classmates who were about 6 years older than them. And now we have the same experience with other children. They have learned reasoning, logic, debate, communication effectively. Now, the whole purpose of studying Srimad Bhagavatam is not these academic benefits. But as we know, the reason why we study Srimad Bhagavatam for our children is that they may gain spiritual benefits, so that they may go back to God after the end of their life, right? Prabhupada said, these children that we have, they're not ordinary children. They've already done a lot of devotional service in their last life and are here simply to finish off their work and go back to Godhead. And as parents, it becomes our duty to give them such kind of education, which teaches them not only things like eating, Prabhupada said, eating, sleeping, mating, and defending, because these things are innate in every child. They don't need training for these things. Prabhupada gave a very nice example, just like a child, if you give him a cookie, he knows exactly where to put it, straight into his mouth. Right? He doesn't need training for that. The same thing with the other three things. One doesn't need training for that. But what he said, what one does need training is how to control these activities, and so that one can devote their life to Krishna. So this is how my journey in teaching Srimad Bhagavatam to my children began. When my children were 5, I started thinking about their formal education. What kind of school am I going to send them? And like any other parent, we had aspirations. We wanted to give them a good academic background, but at the same time, pass on those Krishna conscious values that as devotees were becoming so dear to us. So initially, I enrolled them in a private school, and then because I would volunteer time in that school, I noticed that I was becoming dissatisfied, both spiritually, in terms of what they were picking up in values, as well as academically. And so I started looking for alternative ways to teach them. And at that time, I came upon the concept of homeschooling that was getting very popular in America. So I thought, well, I was very, very nervous, of course, because I didn't know what to think of it. But homeschooling is a very established process here in America. So I bought a curriculum for the whole year, and I thought, well, if I teach my children during the summer months, and if they do well, then I will continue. Otherwise, I'll put them back to school. And what was amazing that in the 3 or 4 months during summer, they were able to finish the entire year's worth of curriculum. And this was only just studying 2 hours a day. So I started becoming more and more confident in teaching them myself. But then very soon I became dissatisfied with the formal curriculum and started looking for options how to teach them, in a Krishna conscious way. That's when I wanted to try teaching them through Srimad Bhagavatam. My whole motive was to somehow give this share this knowledge with my children. I hadn't read Srimad Bhagavatam myself before, and so this was my first time going into these books. And what I noticed was that both of us, we noticed that as time was going on, the children are doing rather well, both spiritually and materially. So we have to understand that Srila Prabhupada's books have everything. It's equipped with everything, both materially and spiritually, and there's nothing lacking. And when we pursue their spiritual goals in life, then we have to be assured that materially there will be no lacking, because after all the material qualities are waiting at the door of a devotee, waiting for them to accept them. A devotee of the Lord cannot lack anything materially, because Krishna is the source of all material and spiritual knowledge. So now I will talk to you um, sorry, about the spiritual benefits from reading Srimad Bhagavatam. One of the things that is very, very important for children, because children have a tendency to imitate their elders, right? To imitate those in front of them. In fact, it is said, whoever we put in front of the children in the first 5 years, we can pretty much predict their future. How are they going to turn out in life? So, which means that we need to give them good role models, right? Now we see that in this world, um, actually Srimad Bhagavatam explains that there is actually no pure goodness in the world. Why? Because all goodness is contaminated over time with passion and ignorance. So so the role models that we find in today's society is not ideal, and this is very evident because if you read what's going on in the world, you'll see some very good people, and but very soon over time you see that how they have been overcome by other lower qualities. But Krishna conscious role models are very, very powerful because they have God in the center, they have Krishna in the center. And when the children grow up hearing and associating with such uh, devotees, naturally their character rubs on them. So Srimad Bhagavatam is full with stories of such great personalities who are so ideal in their behavior. And some of them are children themselves, like Dhruva and Prahlad Maharaj. We know that how Lord Chaitanya, he wanted to hear the stories of Prahlad and Dhruva hundreds of times. Why? Because of the lessons that he learned from these stories. So we know that as we read Srimad Bhagavatam, every time we get newer and fresher meanings. And as the children read about these great personalities, Krishna and his devotees and his pure devotees, they gradually their character rubs on them. And as they get older, they begin to appreciate the instructions as well. So now what kind of qualities do we want our children to learn, right? The qualities that, such as humility, self-control, compassion, mercy, um, tolerance. These are wonderful qualities. Prabhupada explains how even 50 years ago, influential people in India, they sent their children to Gurukula, even though they had everything at their disposal, money, fame, everything. Why? Because they found the necessity, the need for teaching the children good character. And the Vedic education naturally gives that. Now let's just take a few examples, just very brief examples. For the example, the story of Parikshit Maharaj, right? So in that story, we hear about the quality of humility that is shown by Parikshit Maharaj. That in spite of the fact that he got cursed, and in spite of the fact that he had so much power to reverse the curse, he chose not to do it. Why? Because he saw it as part of Krishna's plan. On the other side, he showed such great leadership and strength and tolerance when dealing with Kali, right? Uh, and he was able to take to combine the two qualities and be a good leader, even though he was such a pure devotee of the Lord. And we see that again and again in the scriptures, right? Great kings such as Yudhishthira Maharaj, Parikshit Maharaj, they were Raj Rishis, yet they were great, powerful leaders who did not hesitate to to spread Krishna consciousness in their kingdom, as well as maintain law and order in their kingdom. Then we hear stories of Vitasura and their faith in Krishna. We hear about the fact that the question of whether Vitasura and Bali Maharaj, they were demons or devotees, right? And how uh, qualities, you know, being Krishna consciousness does not depend on one's birth. Such an important thing to teach our children, right? In today's world, that everyone, no matter who we are, where we come from, which family we belong, how much money we have, we are all eligible to receive Krishna's mercy. So in this way, we can hear, and of course, we hear from the story of Prahlad, the quality of tolerance, how he tolerated the atrocities of his father. And in contrast, Hiranyakashipu's father he could not control himself. In a fit of anger, he was ready to kill his son. And last of all, the quality of gratefulness in the story of Dhruva Maharaj, that after 36,000 years, when he went to Badrika ashram to prepare for his last journey back to Godhead, he and the airplane came to take him. Dhruva Maharaj refused to get on the airplane. Why? Because he remembered his mother, who was his first guru, showing him the path to Krishna. And of course, we know the rest of the story, how Nanda and Sunanda pointed out to the sky and said, "See, your mother is already leaving before you." So we see this quality of gratefulness in our children, that in this story, right? Now, if you were to teach this quality to your child and just let them know how much anybody, you do for the child, and that how the child must be grateful, do you think it will make a big impact? I remember, growing up and going to convent, in India. um, I went to a convent, which was like a Christian school, and we had this first class, the moral science class, and we were learning the Ten Commandments, and all the good things of being very loving our neighbor and being honoring our father and mother. And I remember it would be a class where none of the children would take it seriously. It would just go from one year and come out from the other year, right? But when we read stories like this, it goes deep into the heart, right? Because these characters are absolute. And when we hear about them, these qualities um, affect us. So we want our children. Prabhupada said it's not enough to just give them academic achievements and worry about their economic development, but it's more important to give them these qualities, because that's what makes a gentleman, he said. Otherwise, he said, it's just like decorations on a dead body. So now we will talk about the academic benefits from reading Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, so this, if you've had experience reading Srimad Bhagavatam, you will know that actually the study of Srimad Bhagavatam evokes inquiry in all of us, especially in children who are by nature very, very curious. And when we take those, this this need for knowing, this ability to inquire, and we fan it nicely, then it leads to deeper and deeper thinking skills. It leads to critical thinking skills, strong reasoning abilities, and also good communication through the process of discussion. Today, employers are looking for people who have these skills, people who can take a problem, organize it, synthesize it, and synthesize it, and then find a solution for it, give their own realizations from it. Gone are the days when educational institutions expected children to simply memorize and cram up everything and give it back in the examinations. Now they're also looking for students who have these abilities. Such a child who has developed these skills are considered um, are considered well educated. In fact, actually, in America, if you want to become a lawyer, one of the things that they really prefer is a degree in philosophy. Why? Not because of the philosophical content, but because of the skills that are needed to reach philosophical solutions. And clearly, Srimad Bhagavatam gives those skills. Now, Srimad Bhagavatam gives good language skills. We heard about we heard in Prabhupada's quote how he said children reading Srimad Bhagavatam, their language skills will be more than MA PhD because the language is MA PhD. And how does Prabhupada do this? Is how do we learn, how we teach our children through this? Is through context. When we read Srimad Bhagavatam, they're able to pick up big words and understand the meaning through context. This is a lot more easier way to study, words, vocabulary, than trying to give a set of 10 words to our children and having them, understand and learn the meaning. So, vocabulary learning becomes very easy for our children. And then, of course, skills such as debate, you know, um, debate, playing devil's advocate also becomes very easy through study of Srimad Bhagavatam. As you know, if you've heard the morning walk conversations that Prabhupada has with his disciples, it's very, very fun and it's very, very interesting how he will become the materialist, and the disciple will become the devotee, and they will argue back and forth. Concepts such as whether we are the body or the soul, and it becomes a very animated discussion. And of course, other subject matters also, on science topics, for example, the origin of life. And so this is how he would train his disciples through playing devil's advocate. Now, this can be done through the study of Bhagavatam with the children. In fact, when I was doing one of these sessions with the children, they get so excited. They think it's such a great thing. Children love to challenge. Children love to debate and put up a good fight. And to engage these inclinations in understanding the problems with impersonalism, mental speculation, and atheism is wonderful because they develop those skills early on, and they know that so that when they go out into the world later on in their life, they will have no problem seeing everything in context. Even though most of the higher studies are full with impersonalism, materialism, atheism, and all these things. But having a good grounding in the philosophy of Bhagavatam, as well as in the skills of how to fight and how to argue and challenge, really comes in handy, especially when Prabhupada talks about the origin of life in so many different ways. The chemical evolution theory, the and then of course Darwin's evolution theory, and the Big Bang theory. All these things become very easy for children having grown up with these things. And a lot of the children are going to school, right? Or most of your children are going to school. So even if they study these subjects through non-devotional books, they are able to see it from the Bhagavatam perspective. That's why it's so important to give them the foundation of Srimad Bhagavatam before they are exposed to non-devotional books. And another thing that we have to understand, that the reasoning, the understanding in Bhagavatam is not dogmatic. In other words, Krishna doesn't say that to Arjuna that here is what I'm telling you, and you just keep quiet and do it. No, there's a debate, there's a dialogue going on between them, and an argument. And Arjuna doesn't understand, and he keeps asking Krishna to explain himself further till he's completely understood, and then he surrenders, right? So, therefore, we know that is rational thinking. How Bhagavatam gives us, an understanding. It's not blind faith, but rather faith that is based on reason and thinking. So, one other thing that I wanted to point out is that these skills, such as logic, which is logics and learning through analogies. For example, analogies is a section of logic, right? So when one studies Srimad Bhagavatam through the use of these analogies and metaphors, one develops these skills of logic very easily, right? So, and also the abstract concepts become easier to understand. The abstract spiritual concepts uh, become easier for a child to understand. For example, just a very simple understanding of that we are not this body, but we are spirit soul is explained so beautifully by Prabhupada through the analogy of the car and the driver. And, and by taking us through that analogy, Prabhupada makes it so much easier for us to understand this concept in a conditional state. The same thing works for our children, right? For example, higher concepts such as the concept of death is also understood very nicely through examples and analogies. We know that how Prabhupada explains the fear of death, how death is very fearful for a materialist, but not fearful for a devotee. So many parents ask me about this problem of how to teach topics such as death, dying, and the concept of hell, and and these difficult concepts which they feel can be detrimental to them, but it's not, because always everything in Srimad Bhagavatam is put into context. In others, we hear the fearful nature of death for a non-devotee, but at the same time we hear that how death is not fearful for a devotee, right? So and Prabhupada gives that very nicely through the example of the cat. You know how the cat carries the kitten in the mouth, but the same cat also carries a rat in the mouth. Now, kitten feels very safe in the mouth of his mother, but the rat is very, very fearful. So, and then we see those same examples of in the Bhagavatam. For example, the how Dhruva Maharaj leaves his body, after he boards the plane, is definitely a beautiful story of how his body turns spiritual and he goes back to Godhead, right? So, and many, many stories like that. For example, the story of Rithasura and his how he died in such fighting and going into samadhi and being with Krishna. So when children read these stories, they instead of being fearful, they actually develop a lot of, they reflect on it and they develop a lot of faith and hope for their own future, rather than making it, proving it, uh, having it negative. It actually becomes positive. Why? Because Bhagavatam is taught with contrast. Just like we had the story of Prahlad, we see how Hiranyakashipu is the greatest terrorist that history has ever known, right? But Prahlad is the greatest devotee. So we understand about the nature of this world through this story. Prabhupada read the story for many, many months in Vrindavan, because he said that it was so pertinent to our time today, and the nature of this material world. He found it very, very useful in dealing with the material world. So what happens is children are able to take these stories and put it and understand it in the present context. In other words, learning about the nature of this material world, but from a spiritual perspective, is a lot more effective than trying to learn the nature of this material world through experience. Through experience, because as we know, Prahlad, he talked very deep philosophy about the nature of this material world, and just by hearing in the womb of his mother, he did not have to go out and experience that through the process of. So he learned it through the process of hearing. So that becomes a very, very powerful way to teach our children. Now, in the same story of Hiranyakashipu in the second chapter, there's so many things we can teach just from one chapter in Bhagavatam. And we hear the qualities of Hiranyakashipu, how his envy for the Lord led him for his envy for all living entities. How not only was he envious of the devotees, but he was always also envious against the animals, especially cows, and he had them slaughtered, right? He was also envious towards, nature that Krishna had provided. Anything that pleased the devotee, he was envious of. So he gave orders for the destruction of trees, fruit trees, especially fruit trees. and mines and all those things that give the earth bounty, right? And through the process of exploitation, he started becoming very, very affluent. So if just taking this chapter, one can learn so much about the nature of this material world. And when we see, people in this material world who are very, very, inimical and destructive, we can understand. The children can understand. Well, in this material world, there were people like Hiranyakashipu, and so this is part of what material life is about, right? And then they understand why people do the way they do. Why, in a society like this, there is these very things that Hiranyakashipu was trying to do, right? So they learn how to, the nature of this material world, but also how to live in it, like taking the example of Prahlad Maharaj. So they're learning about, you know, um, the nature of this world and its people. They're learning about ecology, environment. They're learning about so many subject matters. Right? So in this way, just in one story, they have already learned many, many subjects, and to a point where it actually it they take it in, and it also affects their own character and what they want to be in life. So, in the same story, in the same section of Prahlad, we hear about how Hiranyakashipu, at one point, even though he's such a big demon, that even Prahlad kind of, is strong and chastises him. But yet, when he had Prahlad one time when he came back home from school, he had him on his lap, right? And he was shedding tears, and his tears were falling on top of Prahlad's head. And one would think, well, he's also got affection, for his son. Look at him, he's crying. So we had a nice discussion about the nature of real love, right? What does real love mean? And then it went into really deep philosophy, and all the children shared what they thought real love was. And then we came to the conclusion that real love is something in which, um, where we love Krishna first, and then automatically we love everyone. In other words, without pouring water on the root of the tree, we cannot love the branches and leaves are not watered. Water has to go into the root first. So therefore, by loving Krishna, we automatically love our brothers, our sisters, our fellow devotees, the people at large. We love everyone. Why? Because Krishna is the Father and we are all his children. So just like when we love the Father, we automatically love our brothers and sisters. In the same way, when we love Krishna, we automatically love each other. So it led into a really, really nice discussion. So in this way, children are able to get into many, many areas, right? And talking about analogies, they become so effective in learning language and in developing their reasoning skills that these children are able to get very deep into something and be able to extract deeper and deeper meanings from about life, so that when they're faced with the mature life, when they fly their own nest and they go on in their journey, they will develop a habit of looking at things critically and not blindly. We have other, Prabhupada explains so many things through the use of metaphors, through figurative speech, so many things that they teach in schools, and it's so easily and effectively done through the Srimad Bhagavatam. So there's many, many stories again and again that we can talk about. So now I will explain to you about the methodology for teaching Srimad Bhagavatam, which is very, very important. So when my children were young, then I started teaching them Srimad Bhagavatam. My younger one was 5, my older one was 7. And we'd sit in a circle and take turns reading just translations. I would pick out, initially, I started with stories. For example, the Prahlad story or the Dhruva story. Now, Prahlad story is practically almost the entire 7th canto, right? And then we have Dhruva story. a wonderful story to begin with. So we'd take turns reading the translations, and then I would open it for discussion. Okay. Now, children at that age, they're not capable of going through purports because it's long and they lose their patience. So if parents are able to read the purports ahead of time, then that becomes very, very nice and valuable, because then you can note the points on the side of the things that you'd like to open up for discussion. Now, we have to be careful that we don't need to discuss every little thing, just the things that we think would really make them curious and will bring out, will lead to a nice discussion. So we can do that. And then when we open it for discussion, then they're able to share and think more deeply about the subject matter. Now, why discussion? Because discussion is very, very important in sharpening the intellect of the child. As you know, the whole Srimad Bhagavatam took place as a conversation between Sutta Goswami and the sages, right? And discussion, it makes the child think and reason, like I mentioned. It develops good communication skills, and it sharpens their brain. So the children who go through this process of discussion are able to take a problem and to reflect on it. Right? So after discussion, then the time for reflection comes, where the child, having heard the story, the entire chapter, is able to give their reflection, their realizations. And this is really the most fun part. After going through, for whatever time you can spare, then the child is ready to speak and is ready to give their reflections, right? I know one story that I did with a bunch of children, several children, the Dhruva story. The children had read that story many times, but then having gone through this process of going deep and discussing, when the time for realizations came, it was amazing the types of realizations they wanted to share. And what struck them was how deep this story was. Something that they thought that was just a story about a little boy who went through that harsh treatment from his stepmother turned out into something that they were reflecting on all types of children things, right? In terms of the nature of Suruchi, her envy, and in contrast, the nature of Suniti and her chastity to Krishna, and her ability to take a situation and make it into such a fortunate situation, right? Her ability to preach to her child not to be envious, and not to give others pain, because that pain will come back to us. Her ability to honor Krishna, to glorify Krishna by telling him to go to this forest and seek him. How she had no ability to she had no ability to give him what he wants, to help him, because she's only one mother, and how Krishna has millions of mothers, right? So they were able to take that one story and 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 really go deep into it, right? And then, of course, when you go deeper, the story of to reflect on why the king, he did not get such a heavy reaction, but Surichi did. Surichi died in a forest fire, but Uttanapad, um, he did not have to go through such a heavy reaction. So we talked about why the difference, and we went really deep into it, right? So in this way, a child, just through one story, has already reflected so many things in one story. So then concepts such as talking about, I remember with a group of teenagers, we went really deep into one story. And again, that was the story of Hiranyakashipu, the Prahlad story. In the same chapter, but towards this last section, we hear Hiranyakashipu talking to his relatives, trying to pacify them because they were very disturbed with the death of, grieving for the death of his brother Hiranyaksha. Now we hear how Hiranyakashipu gives the story of these queens of Suyagya who were lamenting the death of their husband, the king, and how, due to their lamentation, they were not allowing the body to be cremated. And Prabhupada writes in the purport how the soul was hovering there, not able to leave and move on to the next body. And that lets it us to such an animated discussion about death and about cremation and why the different cultures have different ways where they take care of the dead body, and how cremation helps the the soul to move on. When he sees his body being burnt, the soul leaves attachment from that body. But this attachment that a soul has, which is a non-devotee, is so very painful, right? Because he's not able to leave his own body as well as leave the association of his dear ones. So in this way, we, instead of it becoming like a, a negative horror type of incident, it actually became so amazing. We were even talking about near-death experiences that people experience in the modern world. You know, we discussed the concept of hell. You know, how hell is made simply to condition the mind to move on to an animal's body. Otherwise, the human body is not equipped to become an animal, and how this is just meant for those who are sinful and who need whose bodies are meant to be degraded to an animal's body. So how, in contrast with a devotee's body, this is not the case. How the consciousness is uplifted, and how within less than a flash, Krishna is there for the devotee. So it just, I remember it became such a wonderful discussion in reflecting that the children, and these were all teenagers, they came away just feeling very, very grateful. See what happens, the study of Bhagavatam, what it does is instead of giving fear of death, fear of material life, it gives fearlessness. Knowledge becomes powerful, right? So when children gain this knowledge, which is, it's a fact that they are living in this material world, and material world, as we know, is full of suffering, right? So by equipping them about the truth, but at the same time giving them hope for the future, their own hopes, of their own future, giving them the power of reflection, giving them the power to develop compassion, we do them a great service, and they will be always thankful in their life for giving them this knowledge. So we will move quickly through these slides on how to teach Srimad Bhagavatam to children of all different ages. Now, so for children that young, when they're very young, all the way from, you can say, 2 or 3 to 5, the children are not able to read, right? So we can show them pictures from Prabhupada's Bhagavatam. We have many beautiful pictures, and we can point them out. We can discuss the stories behind the pictures, and we can do them again and again. Now there is a group in London. It's called the Baby Bhagavatam group, and this group is devoted to teaching the children from 2 to 3 years old to all the way to 5 to 6 years old Bhagavatam. And they started out from Canto 1, Chapter 1, the questions by the sages. And what they do is make it very, very creative with all types of drama and action, so that it becomes easy for the child to develop, to take that philosophy. Let me see if I can play this audio for you. It's a couple minute audio about one of their classes, that one of the audio renditions that a mother made.
Oh my goodness, where are we? Can you hear that, Lally? Where are we?
We're in the forest of Namisaranya.
The forest of Naimisharanya. Oh wow, it's so beautiful here. What can you see?
Chirping birds.
I can see chirping birds.
And loads of trees.
Loads of trees, yes. And look, Lally, can you see? There's so many sages.
And a super family.
Yes. Yes, you're right.
There he is.
There he is, yes. Oh my gosh, there's many great sages. They've all gathered together to perform a sacrifice for 1,000 years, just because they want to please
Lord Krishna and his devotees.
Yes, they want to please Lord Krishna and his devotees. And who did you say was the leader? Where's the leader?
Sita Goswami over there.
Oh yes, he's over there. Hare Krishna, Sita Goswami.
Hare Krishna, Sita Goswami.
Oh my goodness. The other sages, they're very respectful towards him. Can you see that? Oh my goodness. I wonder why. Why are they so respectful towards him?
Because he's the tallest.
Or the oldest?
Oldest of the
Oh, I see.
and he knows all the scriptures.
Really? Wow. So he's the oldest out of all the sages, and he knows all the scriptures in all the world.
And he always listened to his spiritual master, so his spiritual master blessed him.
Oh, right. I see. Because he was very good and he listened to his spiritual master was very pleased with him. His teacher was very pleased, and he lifted up his right hand and he blessed Sutta Goswami. And you know what? Sutta Goswami had loads of friends, and all his friends were learned sages as well. Did you know that? And you know, whoever your friends are, you become like that. And because all his other friends were learned sages, he was also a learned sage too. This is very interesting. Wow. Nice to meet you, Sutta Goswami, and nice to meet you, lovely sages all gathered together. Somebody else that we're forgetting. Who is it?
It's Sukadeva Goswami's daddy.
Yes, oh yes, Sukadev got.
I hope you enjoyed this. So this is just one of the things that they do is we make a whole drama from these chapters and make it very, very interesting for the children. So you can, of course, everybody will have their own creative versions. So one can try that and see how we can give this knowledge even to a little child. And then, of course, older children who are just learning how to read, we pick out a story such as Prahlad or Dhruva or Gajendra and the crocodile. So many nice stories, and then we read the translations. If they cannot read, then we read it to them with expressions, and then again we stop and explain. Actually, we explain the translations as well. Again, make it very creative and imaginative, and ask them challenging questions, some factual, some challenging questions. In this way, they get deep into it. There was one child that I did in that age group. He was about 5 years old, and I did some, sessions with him. And one day, we were doing the story of Dhruva Maharaj. When, like I mentioned earlier, when he was when the airplane from Vaikuntha came to get him, then yeah, it was such a beautiful description that he said that he actually wanted to sit on that plane and go. And then I said, okay, yes, one day you can go. The time will come and you can actually go to Vaikuntha. And he said, no, 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 but I want to go now. Then I asked him, I said, okay, if you want to go now, then is it okay? You'll have to leave your parents behind, your mother and father. Is that okay? And he thought about it for a little while and he said, well, I think I'm going to wait because I don't want to make the same mistake as Ajamal did. Now, he had read the story of Ajamal several months ago, but he remembered that how Ajamal was, he was actually a very, very good Brahmana who was raised in very Brahmanical ways by his parents. But at a certain point in his youth, he fell down by a prostitute. And he went into sinful life for many, many years. He had many children from her, and he did abominable things. And later on, as he was dying, he was very old, and his last child was like very, very little. His name was Narayan. And as he was dying and in the throes of death, and very, very fearful, because he saw the Yamadutas come and to get him, and they had fearful looking faces. So he was full with terror, and he started calling on his little son Narayan. And of course, we know the story how Vishnu Dutas came also because he had chanted the name of the Lord, and they stopped the Yamadutas from dragging the soul. So, in other words, Jamal got a second chance, right? And when he got a second chance, he reformed himself. He realized his mistake, and all his previous learning came back. And the first thing that happened to him, he started regretting. He started lamenting for all his mistakes. Especially, he was lamenting for neglecting his old parents. Now, that little 5-year-old child was able to take the two stories together and compare them and put them together. And this was only a 4.5 to 5-year-old child. Now, just look at the ability that a child develops through the study of Srimad Bhagavatam to take things and put them in the correct perspective. Okay. So children at that age, they are fascinated with things. They ask very deep questions, especially the question I remember doing with some little children, the story of, Bali Maharaj. And then later on, the story of Ritasura and how they could see that these were big, big demons, but yet they were great devotees, right? They did their duty of fighting, but yet they were great devotees who surrendered to the Lord. Especially we hear in contrast with Indra, who was, even though he was a devotee, but he was, he was not, he was a mixed devotee. And how Krishna, even though he protected Indra, but really he protected Vritasura. He protected his faith and took him back to Godhead. So all these questions, the young children of this age group are able to understand and ask the right questions, right? So they also become very reflective. So in this way, we can benefit the children. Then, of course, the older children, I've already discussed with you the different stories and the levels in which we can take it. We can go, as Srimad Bhagavatam is taught in different layers. We don't have to give them all layers at once, but we can gradually take them through different layers. So obviously, children of this age group, they will naturally, we take them deeper. Questions that are simply and are not simply factual, but they become the whys and the hows and comparisons. So, so in this way, the child is thinking becomes more and more fine-tuned, right? Now, I know many parents have that question. They oftentimes ask me about the questions of how to teach our children adult topics, right? And practically in every seminar, I get these questions. So I thought I'll just address it here for briefly. And then later on, I'm going to open up the seminar for questions so that you can ask your own questions. So now we understand that topics such as sex and violence, their children are going to pick up anyway. If they don't learn from Bhagavatam, rest assured they will learn from outside sources. It could be school where they go to, their peers, or it could be through the electronic medium. And we know that the results of learning from these sources can be very, very detrimental. Right? So, but the perspective that Bhagavatam gives is very, very different because it places it in context. It explains that sex engaged for sense gratification can be very, very detrimental, as we see in the story of, Diti and the birth of Hiranyakashipu, and in the story of Puranjan and his wife, right? But it doesn't have to be that. We also hear on the other spectrum, we hear stories of Daksha and also Kashyapa Muni and how they begot thousands of children for creating progeny, right? For populating the earth. And the purpose was to raise Krishna conscious children. And of course, we hear many, many grahastha couples in the story, couples who had exalted children. We heard the story of Rishabdev and his 100 sons. We heard the story of Karda Muni and Devahuti and the birth of Kapila Muni and also his 9 daughters, right? So by putting it in contrast, what good grahastha life means, when things are done according to the pleasure of Krishna, for raising God-conscious children, that is a different perspective than the type of things that we see in society today, where there's illicit relationship between men and women. The children understand that the nature of this material world is the attraction between the opposite sexes. This is just part of what material world is about. But by taking that same desire and using it to please Krishna, then that becomes devotional activity. Right? Of course, when we teach them, we know we can put boundaries. Generally, children because they are innocent, they do not go into details. They understand that this is where the limit is, right? So in this way, we have to understand that anything in the Bhagavatam is transcendental and it cannot be detrimental to our children's life. Similar things with violence, where there's so much violence being shown, is being described in Srimad Bhagavatam. Krishna himself kills Hiranyakashipu, and he's tearing his abdomen and pulling out in his intestines and wearing it like a garland. Now, to an outsider who's not a devotee, it seems really like horrific. But to a devotee, it doesn't, because one understands that when Krishna does violence, there's a higher purpose. He's meant to root out another violence, right? And also, when Krishna kills, that person benefits from that, right? But the violence that we see in today's world is just the opposite. It is simply for sense gratification, for polishing their false ego, right? Such violence, when they see children, when they see on television or in the internet, has very bad detrimental effects. Because there's no, the only purpose, when you see a movie, for example, a karmi movie, then it's all, people, there's violence, right? Nobody knows who's shooting, why they're shooting, and what is the purpose, right? It's simply meant for sense gratification. So one has to draw the difference. One has to understand then when Krishna kills, or when his devotees kill, whom Krishna empowers to kill. Now, such killing is meant for the benefit of society, for establishing law and order. So, a child will not, it will not be harmful for a child to study any story in the Srimad Bhagavatam, and we should not hesitate to take them through that, through the entire books. And I remember also I have many groups that I do, especially for older children, and it's interesting how through many stories, especially I remember through the story of Karda Muni and Devahuti, we were able to talk, and these was all boys and girls together in this group, and we were able to talk very freely about the different ashramas, the duties of the brahmachari ashram and grahastha and so on, and we were able to discuss quite openly, why the Vedic culture is restrictive on the free intermixing of girls and boys and topics like that without any problem, because they always put it in context with the story, right? And we can also do it according to time, place, and circumstance, where it's impossible to completely disconnect, but at the same time, one should understand the limits, right? And understand what can be detrimental to one's person's life, right?
Yes.
So I'm going to, so I've already discussed the story of Dhruva. So I will stop here and see if anyone has any questions, on any part of the seminar that I just gave. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mataji, for such an informative session. There are many questions by the devotees, if you allow so.
Yes.
Also, there is an announcement. All the devotees who wish to purchase the books can fill the form which has been sent in the chat box to connect directly to the publisher. So moving on to the questions. The first question is, what is to be done when the child is very creative and brings in deviations from the original text and takes the story in a different direction? For example, in the sound clip, if the question was asked to a creative child as to why are they offering him obeisances, what if the child answers differently and brings in his creative perspective?
I really don't understand the question. Can you just paraphrase it and just give me in really briefly what exactly is the question?
Yes, Mataji. So the question is that if a particular question is asked to a normal child and a creative child, there are two different perceptions of those children. So there are two different answers.
Yes. So I understand now. So in other words, if you're teaching a group of children and they both are coming from different backgrounds, for example, one child may be from a devotee background while the other may not be from a devotee background, how to take that and put it in two different perspectives within one scenario. So what my answer to that would be just to give it the way it is. In other words, we explain according to the Shastra what the topic means, right? What obeisances mean when we offer obeisances, and give it straight from that perspective, the way Prabhupada explains in the Srimad Bhagavatam or any other scripture. And then for a child who's not really able to grasp it, he will grasp it. One can explain further to that child and explain it more clearly. However, it's a topic that anybody would understand, right? And we have to understand that even though the child is not coming from a devotee background, but yet his soul is looking for Krishna. And so the approach we do is very similar to how we would teach devotee children.
Yes, thank you, Mataji. The next question is how to overcome bad thoughts or anything that we shouldn't have. I am being asked this question many times by many students.
How to overcome bad thoughts? Well, the best thing would be to to read it in context of a story, because obviously we know that bad thoughts come because our mind is contaminated by all these mundane things, and when we purify our mind gradually, then all these bad thoughts turn into good thoughts, right? So we are conditioned for many lifetimes. We're conditioned to think in a certain way, to think in a way which makes us envious of other people, inimical. It makes us, want to compete, and these tendencies are there in us, and it's a process of purifying. And the process of purification is a gradual process. So as we read the stories, then the bad thoughts go away. So the way you explain to them is that these thoughts can be purified just by chanting the holy name and reading and hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. So you can encourage them to develop good habits, some practical devotional skills every day, where they're chanting some rounds, or they're reading, or doing devotional activities, participating in many temple programs, or whatever programs the one can participate in. So this is really the process.
Yes, thank you, Mataji. The next question is, it is said that we are the children of Lord Krishna. Then how come we got this wife and husband relation?
Well, this this concept of husband and wife is also existing in Vaikuntha. If you read the third canto, chapter 15, beautiful description of Vaikuntha, and how the residents there are, both the husband and wife are flying together in an airplane, and how they're singing the glories of the Lord, both together are singing the glories of the Lord. And to the point, they're so absorbed in Krishna that even when a nice fragrance comes from the flowers along the way, they feel that it's a disturbance from their absorption in the Lord. Why? Because Krishna is the source of all beauty, the source of the most beautiful smell, right? So when one experiencing the beauty and smell of Krishna, then one doesn't need anything more, and everything else seems like a extra thing, right? So this concept of male and female is already also in the spiritual world. And so the material world is a reflection of the spiritual world. So naturally, these things are reflected here, but in a wrong way, right? In a wrong way. In other words, wrong way means, this is meant to be experienced in a spiritual sense, but in material world, things become perverted. In other words, one develops this relationship on the basis of sense gratification rather than on the basis of serving Krishna. Now, for devotees, grahastha life doesn't mean intense sense gratification, right? So it can actually become very meaningful and very pleasing to Krishna. So all these things can be explained in context with the modern world, in context with the devotees, and also in context with the spiritual world.
Yes, thank you, Mataji. The next question is, in your book, Homeschooling Krishna's Children, you highlight the importance of the morning program. How did over the years continue the morning program with your children? Did this require children to sleep early?
Mhm. Yes, Prabhupada stressed that children should, after they wake up, they should do some, the chanting and the glorifying in the morning, because it really sets the day. In other words, it makes a person very peaceful and very happy. So now in a grahastha situation, where the children are not in Gurukula, where automatically the children get up really early, but things can be adjusted. It's a lot harder to have that schedule where the children are be starting Mangal Artik at 4:30. So one can adjust it slightly, where it's later according to your situation. And sometimes I was struggling with this as well. When I was raising my children, we had a preaching center, and many times the programs would go late into the night, and it was hard to maintain that. So what I did was on days where it was very, very difficult, the children were still, we would do the morning program later. Whenever they woke up, this is how we started the day and began the day. And then we would move on to other things. So you can be flexible. And also in terms of timing, how long it should be, you can also be flexible in that. Because, for example, little children have very little patience, and therefore a very long program will be difficult for you and for them. So you can make it shorter. But the point here is that it's nice to start the day like that, because it's very, very beneficial. But for children who are going to school, it becomes a great challenge. I understand. So one can spend maybe 5-10 minutes before leaving. The child can simply sing in front of the altar, recite the prayers and sing. Or even if that becomes a struggle, on some days, then you can do it in the car. In other words, if you inculcate this discipline in the children, later on when they get older and they move on to life, they would have developed these habits, and they will continue. you know in other words, sometimes we have difficult times, and there's a gap in our practice. But we should not get discouraged. We should not get discouraged, because, like any other thing, materially, we see that how perseverance is the key to accomplishing anything, right? Even when we are trying to maintain a relationship in our life, right? It's not like we can put it on autopilot and say, well, I think I've done what I have to do, and that's it. Well, very soon we realize that it's actually not working. We have to constantly work on the relationship, right? Give and take, both keeps going, right? So, in the same way, our relationship with Krishna, there will be struggles in our life, but yet we have to keep persevering and see how best we can do. But try to do everything in a reasonable way, not in an in unreasonable way. In other words, yes, it would be wonderful to put them to bed early, just so they can wake up early. Okay, but in terms of some festivals or things like that coming, it may be difficult. So try to do your best as much as you can do, because this was really close to Prabhupada's heart, that children get up in the morning. He said, actually, for children, there are no more austerities. No austerities. They can eat as much as they like, they can run around as much as they like, but it's important that they start the day in this way.
Yes, thank you for such a wonderful answer. The next question is, how did you teach your children to eat only prasad and sustain it over the years?
Well, again, nothing comes without challenges. It's not easy, but also it takes time. It's a gradual process. And, as one advances, one can realize more and more the importance of eating prasadam. So, once we understand the importance of eating prasadam, then the rest will come easier, right? In other words, we understand how food affects our consciousness. Whatever we take in comes out the other way, right? So in other words, it's important to uh, to purify our consciousness through food. It's a very important activity, and it's an activity that children do 3 or 4 times a day, and as well as adults, right? So you can so by putting purity in that area, it permeates in every other area in our life. As you know, it begins with the tongue. And so when we purify the tongue by eating prasadam, then naturally we purify existence. Just like an artist, his consciousness is reflected in the art that he produces. In the same way, our consciousness is reflected in what we put in. So it's a struggle, but keep trying it till you get it. Because uh, initially it means a lot of work on the part of the parents, especially the mother who's cooking. And because when the children are young, one needs to cook because their senses are wild and they want to get a lot of variety, right? But having satisfied that when they are young, then as they get older, those needs diminish. They become, because other interests take over, right? So this hard work that you put in will pay off.
Yes. Thank you, Mataji. The next question is, if the child has no interest in reading, I think forcing is not good. Then what to do in such case?
Yes. So read a story that the child would be interested in or would want to read. And if he doesn't want to read, because he may be struggling with words, some words really get big and difficult in Srimad Bhagavatam. So you can read to the child till he develops that interest. The way I got the children, interested was just having them, reading it to them and inspiring them with the stories, and gradually encourage them maybe to read one line and then gradually increasing it to another line, to another line. Children need a lot of applause and encouragement. They should see the way you have to teach Srimad Bhagavatam is not like a textbook in school, right? They should not see it as a burden, as something that they have to do, even though they don't want to do it. It should be a fun and easy time. Don't give them any homework from your study of Srimad Bhagavatam with them, even if it's for half hour, 45 minutes, whatever. Because children, we're trying to attract their hearts to Krishna, and they're getting a lot of that in school anyway. So we don't want to put this extra burden on them. So once they see Bhagavatam not as a threat to their playtime or to their work or adding on to the burden of schoolwork, then they will do very well. They should see it as a time, a fun time where they can expand their consciousness, where they can become curious, where they can speak out and give their opinions. Right? Bhagavatam becomes teaching Bhagavatam to children, whether in a school or a home environment, really helps in developing good communication skills between the teacher or parent and the children, because the children are able to open up their hearts, and so are the parents. And they become their relationship becomes very, very close.
Yes, very true, Mataji. The next question is, were there times in your homeschooling journey when you had to motivate yourself, and how did you go through these moments of challenging phases in life?
Yes, yes. Very pertinent question. I did. There were many, many challenges, and honestly speaking, it was all not fun and rosy. Um, because we have to understand that whether one is a devotee or not a devotee, whether you're homeschooling or not homeschooling, life, it will bring its share of trouble and challenges. And so why not take up the challenges in this way where one knows that one is pleasing Krishna, right? In other words, we will know, just if you're planning to homeschool, you will know just in a few months you'll see the result. It's just very, very rewarding. So then, taking up these challenges, taking up these moments of discouragement is okay, but one will be able to overcome it, right? Because we know the goal, we know, and Krishna from within you also will give you the inspiration to keep going, because you will yourself feel so inspired. For our program in homeschooling was very simple. When we got up, whenever the children got up, we did a morning program, and then we sat down into Srimad Bhagavatam for a couple of hours, and then we went out and actually practically applied the principles that we learned in practical life. In other words, I would set up programs for them early on, programs that we did in schools, in schools and libraries and daycares, and later on in high schools we would go and do those programs. And within the home or temple or preaching center, we did programs. We set up festivals and dramas, and we did harinam, and we did book distribution. So most of our homeschooling was outside was out of the home versus inside the home. In other words, a lot of our homeschooling, right? We even did as much as going to prison programs, right? Once a month. So in this way, children got a very good balance of exposure to the outside world, but in a way that they were protected, in a way that they were protected. So it's not necessary to isolate the children, but what we have to do is build a life around them, which is very, very wholesome, you know. So where does teaching Shastra come is very important, is because one's intelligence has to be fed. In other words, they should have a foundation in understanding why they're doing what they're doing. You know, many children who grow up, with a lot of devotional activities, practice, but who lack the philosophy of understanding, they at a certain age in their life, they tend to become distracted and tend to start losing it. So therefore, this knowledge also has to be given side by side with the practical side. But we have to give a lot of that practical side as well.
Yes, very true, Mataji. The next question is, how far homeschooling in India is successful? Because we don't hear the concept here, and that becomes very challenging.
Yes, well, it's challenging no matter where you're at. Even though in America it's a more established process, but yet there are challenges, a lot of challenges, especially in living in a culture that is so different. Devotees here have to find association for their children, other children, and sometimes it can become a challenge, right? But opportunities are here as well, as like in any other place. So in India, it's acceptable, and there are many devotees there who are homeschooling, and each one has developed their own kind of process how to do it. I know some children, some parents have, registered for homeschooling through NIOS, which is like the National Institute for Open Homeschooling, where homeschooling, you're officially registered. Register your child, and the child goes through the grades, and once in a while they have an examination at certain grade levels, and gradually they can enter high school and move on to college. Now, some parents, they do homeschooling in a more independent way, through and partially enroll their children in school, where they're going not as a full-time students, but just going there to give their examinations and do lab work and things. So in other words, they're part-time, going to school. So there's many ways. Please talk to some parents like that who are adopting different processes. No, but one thing we have to remember is that the reason why you develop a desire for homeschooling is because you want to share those Krishna conscious values in your children, and that can be given under different scenarios. In other words, you can do full out study of teaching homeschooling through Prabhupada's books, or you can do it partially. In other words, you can still keep the outside curriculum, which is plenty available there, as well as teach them Srimad Bhagavatam every day. So in any case, whatever you do is going to be beneficial for the children, because the environment in which you have them is very, very nourishing. And by giving that nourishing environment, a child is able to develop the motivation to study, to the point that initially you may need to teach them, but as the child gets older and has developed good language skills, he's actually practically able to study on their own. They actually can do independent study because you have developed in them those study skills, and you've developed in them the desire to learn, right? So it doesn't become so, because many parents ask me this question: how can I don't know much. I'm only just high school or whatever, and how will I be able to teach them? Well, even if you are very poorly educated, any child can be taught who are in the elementary stage, right? And as they get older, they develop their own study skills, and in addition, you can always find help outside to teach them particular subjects that you're not inclined to teach, right? You can find help among devotees, or you can hire somebody who can come and teach the children. There's so many ways to go around it.
Yes, thank you so much, Mataji. The next question is, the concept of death sometimes makes the child insecure. How can we explain the concept for children in age group of 7 to 11 years?
Mhm. Mhm. Well, the way Bhagavatam is taught is that if you find a particular section which is going to be difficult because the child is too young, you can move through it quickly. It's not like you have to dwell on every point in the Bhagavatam because the children are not capable of, understanding so many things. Like I mentioned earlier, it's taught in layers. So we go as far as deep as the child can accept it. So we don't have to worry about the deeper descriptions of death and hell and things like that is explained in the Bhagavatam. But I've noticed that even children in that age group between 7 and 11 I can speak quite openly about that because, people understand. I mean, if they have grandmothers or grandfathers, they know that, they're getting older and and there will be a time when they're not going to be around anymore. I mean, this is a fact of life. So the concept of death is a fact of life. But by putting in a perspective that is uh, easier for them to digest through the stories rather than talking about them dying or you dying. No, instead of that, if you put it in perspective and talk about the stories of people dying or being fearful of death, or and versus a devotee, how he dies, then the child gets the idea, but in a way that he can put it in perspective and understand, okay, well, this is a fact of life. However, I don't need to fear. In other words, this whole thing of giving them a healthy fear of material life, but at the same time, developing fearlessness in them is a way of doing in which we can do it through stories, and put it in the right perspective.
Yes. The next question is, should we pick up stories from between the Bhagavatam, like just Dhruv Maharaj's story, or should we read all the stories?
Okay, so in the beginning, when the child has not developed attraction for Srimad Bhagavatam, you can begin with a story. Like I said, the Dhruva story is a wonderful story to begin with, and then gradually, as there's so much philosophy in these stories, right? Any story, I mean, it's just full with philosophy, right? So they're picking up the philosophy anyway, and as you do them, you realize that, wow, the understanding of deep issues, abstract issues, is so deep, and they're able to grasp it. That's when you know that they're ready for starting out with first canto, chapter 1. And as you see it on the screen, we've developed this curriculum we are developing still on different cantos. And we are doing it. It's a multi-year effort by many parents around the world who are creating resources, study resources for every chapter of the Bhagavatam. And these parents are expert in their own field. Some are counselors, some are computer experts, some are teachers, so. And what we do is we create these resources, and they try it with their own children, and this is what we give you, right? So if you find it handy, then you can actually take help from these books, because what we have here, chapter by chapter, we have summary of the chapter, then we have higher thinking questions, which helps you with framing the questions. Of course, you can frame many, many more questions on that chapter just by you yourself going through it. But you can take help from these questions. And then we have many, many activities, such as the critical thinking activities, analogy activities, drama, acting activities, introspective activities, which makes a child reflect, and then fun projects like art projects, crossword puzzles, and things like that. So, and then also we have key verses where you can find relevant verses, about 2 in each chapter, where the children naturally keeps memorizing verses as they go on into the next chapter. Okay, so that's a fun way. So the study guides will help you with teaching chapters that are very, very philosophical, and there's no story there. That's what is meant to help you with that. as well as the ones that do have stories in a way that that will help. For example, the first chapter of the Bhagavatam is quite difficult, of Canto 1. So we've put that in perspective by creating activities which makes it easier for the child to digest. But yes, you can always begin with a story and then move on to or you can begin with Canto 1, Chapter 1, and use the guidebooks.
Yes, thank you so much, Mataji. The next question is, at what age should we teach the adult topics and what are the limits? Not just adult topics, but concept of stepmother in Dhruva's story or what Ajamil saw and got bewildered.
Yeah. So these stories is not like, if you're beginning from Canto 1, Chapter 1, or if you're taking a story anywhere, these concepts will come. Whether you're reading the Kardamuni and Devhuti story or you're reading Dhruva's story. For example, we hear, like you mentioned, the story of Suruchi and how she became the favorite wife of the king, even though he had two wives, and how he was biased towards her. And many young children between those ages, 7 to 11 or older, they ask these questions. How come he was like that? How come he played favorites? And they feel very adamant about why the king behaved like that. Well, then we just simply explain that, this is nature. How we don't have the capacity to actually, we haven't developed a capacity to be equal to everyone until we become completely pure. So one has the tendency to like something better than the other thing, right? So this is a natural tendency because of the lack, because we're limited in our ability to see everyone equally. So the king had that same flaw, that he was not able to see that until later, right? And in terms of stepmother and real mother, this is very, very common. I mean, even in America, living in America, we see that all the time, where one child may go through several families, and in other words, the father may marry several times, or the mother, and he's being he's going through many mothers, many stepmothers. So this is a reality of life, how due to lack of God consciousness, people are not steady in their married life, and they end up getting married, and therefore children end up having mothers who are not their real mothers. But and of course, seeing it in the perspective of Kshatriya kings, they were allowed to marry more than one, and that's a whole story that we can explain why that was true in terms of king, conquering, annexing different kingdoms, and how it was just a practical way to live. Also, they were very, very capable of, having many wives and maintaining them well, properly, equally. And so this was something they were allowed to do. So you have to put it in perspective of the Shastra, today's world, what's happening in today's world, because if you tell them what's happening in the spirit in the world, it doesn't mean that they get only a negative view of the world. They also get examples, your own example, how you are living in your life with each other, and how that becomes a good grahastha life. So they have many things to see and perspective. And of course, we have stories in the Bhagavatam which gives examples of very good grahastha life. So the child can understand. I mean, we don't need to hide from the children the reality of this mature world, but we don't give children enough credit to put things in perspective, to negotiate these differences. We don't need to give our children everything in black and white. We have to explain to them how there's so many different shades of gray between the black and white. So by giving them the truth, by giving them the real picture of this material life, the children are able to take that in their stride, having the support of their parents, right? And in our own life, not everything is rosy or perfect. So the child understands that, yes, we are not perfect, but we are in the path of perfection.
Yes, very true, Mataji. The next question is there any session where you actually conduct such story sessions for different types of children, may it be live or recorded, which will help us to actually implement these?
Yes, I teach some children, and I can definitely, allow you to come in and listen in into those classes. And I've done that with some parents or teachers who had a great, uh, desire to do that. Also, this one group, I did a seminar for some parents in Pune, and they took the initiative to start Bhagavatam classes for the children. And I think there's about 50 of them that are now enrolled in 5 different classes with 5 different teachers. And they do it online, of course, right now and nowadays. And it's amazing, by taking up this process, they've seen amazing results. And these are children from quite a few varieties of backgrounds, but all of the parents are willing and for the children to learn this. And in this way, they are going from one story to another, you know. And I think over time afterwards they can begin with Canto 1, Chapter 1 when children are ready for that, you know. So it's something that you can actually take it up yourself. And also, I'll be happy to share, the Zoom information when I do it with other children. But at some point, please take the initiative in your own community to form groups like these, where you're teaching children, through the process of discussion, through the process of taking turns reading translations and opening it for discussion and realizations later, and reap and see the children reap the benefits, and you yourself would be inspired. I have got so many groups of parents who are doing this, and I get such wonderful you know experiences from them. The the experience of the children and the teachers. In fact, in Mayapur International School, they've taken up the study of Srimad Bhagavatam as part of their curriculum in both the primary and in higher school, middle school, the primary and middle school. And they're teaching it on a daily basis, and I have such wonderful feedback from the teachers. And then also in Vrindavan, in the Bhaktivedanta Gurukul, they've also taken it as part of their curriculum for the middle school, and now they started with the primary school, and they're going from canto to canto. And they've also incorporated the study of English through the Bhagavatam as well. But that's something that you can see whether that's doable for you. So, so it's not something that cannot be done. It's been tried by many parents, hundreds of parents, and they have been having wonderful results. So I would encourage you to please start, and there will be hurdles. And I am in touch with these parents. I connect with them once or twice a month. I guide them through it. They have a lot of questions and struggles, and I try to help them to the best of my ability. And I would love to also do the same with other communities.
Thank you so much, Mataji. There is also one question and request by devotees that if they can contact you through your personal email ID.
Yes, yes. And I also am available on WhatsApp if you want to text me. That is also there. I can share you my phone number, you know, uh, so I can
That
do
would be
that.
great, Mataji. The next question is, are there any authentic online classes for Srimad Bhagavatam and Srimad Bhagavad Gita for kids? And if you could share the link details with all of us.
Mhm. Yes, I just answered that question just a few minutes ago. And so, what I would say is that you're welcome to join in one of my classes to learn more deeply the process of teaching to your children. And, myself and Braj Balavi Mataji, we can talk more about that and see if we can, uh, have one demo class with the children. Uh, and where I can explain more the process, or open up one of my classes where you can. But I know that many of such classes are going on where mothers are doing, or one parent is doing it with children, and they have incorporated it not only with their own children but with other children in the community, and doing it very faithfully once a week for 1 hour. So, like I said, you should initiate it in your own community, and also I'm here to help.
Thank you so much, Mataji. The next question is how to raise a child in Krishna consciousness as a single mother, how far in such case of single parents homeschooling works, and how to do manage both role of a mother and also a father.
Hmm. Yeah, so these questions are going into more homeschooling questions, which is very nice, and I'm so happy to answer your questions. But I think let's keep the topic more related, or at least closely, not if not closely, but somewhat related to the topic at hand. And I frankly, I will be happy to give a homeschool, not just a homeschooling seminar, but a parenting seminar, in which I incorporate more deeply into this area, where I speak more extensively on these areas of teaching a single child, or the building a program in the home of how to build a home environment in which is conducive for our children, and then of course how to build study Srimad Bhagavatam, and develop an academic curriculum, and based on the 5 R's: um, reading, writing, arithmetic, rote, and raga. And then also the outreach programs, the extracurricular activities. I talk at length about what are some of the things that one can open up for our children in terms of outreach programs, and how beneficial they are in establishing their faith and identity in Krishna consciousness. So I'll be happy to, if there's a great need for that, I'm happy to maybe devote a little time sometime on these topics.
Yes, Mataji, thank you so much. The next question is how to encourage children at the age of 5 years to chant Hare Krishna Mahamantra and reading books.
Yeah, like I said, this comes all in the purview of the parenting seminar, how to encourage them to chant. um, you know but one brief answer to that would be how to chant with them. Children, when they're left alone to chant, they tend to see it as a burden, that is a punishment. We don't want our children to see chanting as a form of punishment or even a reward. Chanting is the means as well as the end. So the easiest way that would be is to chant with. I mean, they will be chanting probably 1 round or 2 rounds, and you can sit and chant with them. That way they think it's a lot of fun, and also they will not develop bad habits, of rushing through it, and you can inspire them while you're chanting. So that becomes very good. And also chanting in groups of other devotees also becomes very inspiring for them on certain occasions. When children come together and chant with some adults, also helps them develop those habits.
Yes, thank you, Mataji. The next question is I find it a bit easier to engage little kids in spirituality, but how am I supposed to preach my peers of age group 15 to 18 years? As every time I try to spiritual talk with them, they automatically lose interest.
Yes. So if it's done through the medium of a story in the Srimad Bhagavatam, it becomes very effective. If we are simply, especially that age group, if we were simply to preach to them and lecture to them, then they don't tend to want to hear, right? Starting 15-year-olds up and onwards, Prabhupada said we should treat them as friends, as partners, in other words. So rather than preaching to them, we preach through the medium of the Bhagavatam, through the medium of the stories. It becomes very, very effective, where they can give also their feelings about it, and gradually they actually open up and they find interesting.
Yes, thank you so much, Mataji. The next question is these days, kids are mostly living in nuclear families and they don't have a good friend circle, also to load off their stress. Connection with other devotee kids is also a weekly affair mostly. In that case, should we allow our kids to mix up with the kids in own locality, even though we know that those are non-devotees?
Well, depending on the circumstance, if they absolutely have nobody to socialize with, devotee friends, then what you could do is invite the other children to your own home more frequently, because that way they're within in a devotional atmosphere, and it's easier to expose to keep your children within the boundaries of Krishna consciousness, as well as the other children to encourage them to be Krishna conscious. So it becomes very effective. I had that same problem when we first moved to Boise. There was actually no devotees there, and so what to do? So initially, I thought, well, these are a couple of them were nice families. I should send them there, and I did. And when they came back, I realized that actually they spend the whole day playing video games, and so and it took a long time to to uncover all these things. So then I started opening my own home to all these children, where we invited them to come and play, spend the day, or even for sleepovers. And and so in this way, I was able to do that more effectively. So some, if you do have to have them associate, well, don't let them associate in a very intimate way, where especially for sleepovers, you should restrict that. And when they come back, you sit and have a nice conversation with them at some point, discuss some of the things that they may have been exposed to, put it in the Krishna conscious perspective, and give them gentle reminders through good examples. Again, reading every day or as much as you can, even if you were to do it twice a week or once a week, these questions will come up in the context of reading these stories or any part of the Bhagavatam. These issues, you can always bring them up in a way that is not pointing fingers at them, but yet making the point of making intelligent discrimination between good association and bad association. In other words, children should be able, through the study of scripture, they should be able to see for themselves what is good for them and what is bad for them, with, of course, reminders from you, right? So children very soon, they're able to actually use these techniques to make their own judgments.
Okay, thank you, Mataji. The next question is, what is the right age to start Srimad Bhagavatam for kids, and if there are any specific cantos?
Well, I just mentioned in the seminar, it can be started very, very early in their life when they're toddlers, 3 years old. And so you can do it at any age. And what was the next question? I forgot the second part.
The right age and any specific cantos.
Well, I just mentioned that already, that you can begin with stories, because that's what's going to attract them more. And then go on to, or you can do the guidebook. Either way, guidebook can be used for any age group, for even the young ones, because it becomes more exciting for them. But otherwise, you can just do some story.
Okay, Mataji. Thank you so much, Mataji, for this wonderful session. We are very grateful to you for having spared your valuable time and enlightening all the parents so beautifully and practically demonstrating via audio clips and various examples, and would request you to come again to guide us with more parenting seminars. We thank all the participants for having joined us. You will may join for future webinars by connecting with us on Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and YouTube channels. You would find the recording of the classes on our YouTube channel, Practical Spirituality. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mataji and Ratnam.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here with all of you. Thank you. Hare Krishna.